The frontier was never merciful. Dust and judgment hung heavier in the air than gunpowder. And in the small, God-forsaken town of Dry Creek, the people had gathered for a spectacle they had long been craving, the hanging of a woman they called Savage. She stood barefoot on the wooden platform, wrists bound, the noose already waiting above her. Her hair was wild from days in the jail cell, her face hardened not by cruelty, but by survival. Yet to the crowd, she was guilty of one thing, being different. She had lived among the native tribes, spoke their tongue, fought like them, and to some, she was one of them. That was enough to seal her fate. Mothers clutched their children's hands. Men spat tobacco at her feet, and the sheriff, an aging man whose badge had long since lost its shine, prepared to read the final words of condemnation. Sarah Cooper. His voice carried over the restless crowd. You stand accused of savagery against God and civilization, for living like a heathen, for rejecting the laws of this town, and for spilling blood where you had no right. You are sentenced to hang by the neck until dead. A hush fell. Only the wooden boards creaked beneath her boots. Sarah's eyes scanned the crowd, not with fear, not with begging, but with a cold defiance. She had already accepted death. For her, mercy had been lost years ago. But then, from the back of the gathering, a voice cut through like a whip. "Sheriff! Don't tighten that rope just yet." Every head turned. It was a rancher, broad-shouldered, his clothes dusted from the road, hat tilted low to hide the sharpness in his eyes. He walked forward, slow but steady, until he stood at the foot of the gallows. He didn't look at the sheriff, didn't look at the crowd. His gaze fixed only on the condemned woman. And then he said the words that froze the town in place. "My boy's been without a mother for too long. And I reckon this woman is going to fill that place." Murmurs spread like wildfire, gasps, disbelief. A storm of outrage rolled through the spectators. The sheriff's brow furrowed. "Now hold on, James Callahan. You mean to say you'd take this savage into your home? Make her a mother to your son?" The rancher didn't blink. "That's exactly what I'm saying." Sarah's lips parted slightly, her first crack of emotion since the trial began. She hadn't asked for salvation, and yet, here it was, disguised as something she couldn't understand. A chance. And in that tense silence, one thing became clear. Her story was no longer ending with the noose. It was only beginning. You know, 99.4% of you watching aren't subscribed yet. Only 0.5% have joined the ride. Don't miss out. Hit subscribe and become part of the story. The silence that followed James Callahan's words was heavier than any sermon preached on a Sunday morning. A hanging was supposed to be a clean affair, quick and final, a show of order in a world full of chaos. But now the script had been torn apart, and the townsfolk of Dry Creek found themselves caught between their thirst for blood and the shocking interruption of a man who rarely spoke at all. The sheriff's hand rested on his belt buckle, fingers twitching near the holster. He wasn't just thinking about the law, he was thinking about the crowd. A sheriff who lost control of a hanging lost control of his town. His eyes narrowed at James. "Now you better explain yourself, Callahan. You come barging in here, talking about making this woman a mother to your boy. You realize what you're saying?" James adjusted his hat, voice calm but steady as stone. "I'm saying my boy doesn't need another preacher's pity. He doesn't need neighbors whispering behind their doors. He needs a mother, someone who'll fight for him, someone who knows what it means to survive. That woman," he pointed up at Sarah, "she's already proved she can do that." The crowd erupted. "She's a murderer!" One man shouted. "She's not even civilized," cried a woman clutching her shawl. "Best thing for that witch is the rope," another bellowed. Sarah stood still, her wrists bound, her chest rising slowly as if she was weighing the stranger's words. She had never met this man, yet in his tone there was no mockery, no pity, just resolve. The sheriff raised a hand to quiet the mob, though his voice carried its own unease. "James, you don't just erase a sentence because you fancy yourself a savior. This town has spoken. Jury found her guilty. You step in now, you spit in the face of the law." James took one slow step closer to the gallows. "Law without mercy ain't justice. It's just a rope looking for a neck." That line cut deep. Even some in the crowd shifted uncomfortably, torn between their prejudice and the weight of his words. Dry Creek was no stranger to hypocrisy. Men who preached Bible verses by day often carried sin on their boots by night. And though Sarah had lived among the tribes, hunted, fought, and bled with them, it wasn't her guilt that truly offended the town. It was her refusal to bend, to crawl, to apologize for what she was, the preacher. A thin man with fire in his eyes stepped forward. "You dare compare this heathen to righteousness? God himself has condemned her ways. If she walks free, the plague of savagery spreads. Today she hangs, or tomorrow our children pay the price." His words found fuel in the mob. Shouts turned to roars. Stones struck the side of the gallows, clattering near Sarah's bare feet. But James Callahan didn't flinch. He turned his head slightly, scanning the faces twisted with hate, and then spoke louder. "You all talk about God's judgment like you own it. But maybe it ain't about savagery. Maybe it's about fear. You see a woman who lived a life you don't understand and you call it evil. But I see someone who's been tested by fire. My boy needs that fire if he's going to make it in this cruel land." He looked up at Sarah again, locking eyes with her. For the first time, her cold defiance faltered. Behind it flickered a question. "Why? Why would you save me?" The sheriff exhaled through his nose, clearly trapped. The law gave him authority, but the crowd gave him power. And right now, the crowd was sharpening itself into a blade. "You better be real sure about this, Callahan," the sheriff warned. "If you take her, she ain't under my law anymore. Whatever she does, it's on your head. You take her into your home, she'll be your burden. And if she spills blood again, no man in this town will lift a finger to help you." James nodded once. "I'll take that risk." The rope hovered above Sarah's head like a shadow refusing to leave. And slowly, almost reluctantly, the sheriff waved his hand. "Cut her down!" Gasps spread through the crowd like fire on dry grass. The deputy stepped forward, knife trembling in his grip as he sliced the rope from Sarah's wrists. Her arms dropped, bruised and raw, yet she didn't stumble. She stood tall, her gaze sweeping over the sea of angry faces, as if to etch every one of them into memory. The mob hissed. Some spat, others threatened vengeance under their breath. But the deed was done. She was no longer theirs to kill. James tipped his hat toward her. "Let's go." She hesitated for a breath, then stepped down from the gallows, her bare feet touching the dirt of freedom once more. The crowd parted reluctantly, their hatred forming a corridor of fire around the unlikely pair as they walked away from death itself. Behind them, the preacher called out one final curse. "You can shield her from the rope, Callahan, but you can't shield her from God's wrath." James didn't turn, and Sarah, for the first time, allowed the corner of her lip to twitch, halfway between a smirk and a snarl. Her second life had begun. The road out of Dry Creek stretched endlessly beneath the hooves of James Callahan's horse. He rode in silence, reins firm, while beside him Sarah Cooper sat on a second horse that once belonged to his late wife. The saddle creaked. The desert wind whipped at her tangled hair, and the distant mountains watched like old gods keeping their secrets. Neither spoke. The air between them was thick with questions. Why had he done it? Why had she accepted? But words weren't their language yet. Survival was. Hours later, the outline of the Callahan ranch rose from the horizon. A weathered barn leaned slightly from too many storms, cattle dotted the pastures, and the farmhouse stood lonely but proud against the emptiness. Smoke curled faintly from the chimney, proof that a boy was inside, waiting. As they dismounted, Sarah's bare feet touched the earth with hesitation. The gallows dust was still clinging to her skin. She glanced at James, who tied the reins without looking at her. "This place," he finally said, voice gravelly from the ride, "ain't much. But it's safe. That's more than you had an hour ago." She didn't thank him. Instead, her eyes drifted to the doorway of the farmhouse, where a small figure stood frozen in the frame. The boy. Ethan Callahan was 9 years old, his eyes carrying the weight of a childhood cut short. He clutched a piece of wood he had been whittling, though his hands trembled now. His father had brought home many things before: horses, strays, even broken tools he swore could be fixed. But never a woman from the gallows. Sarah looked at him, and for the first time since her arrest, she felt something unfamiliar. A sting in her chest that wasn't pain, but memory. She had once been a child standing in a doorway, watching strangers judge her worth. James rested a hand on his son's shoulder. "Ethan, this here is Sarah. She's going to be staying with us." The boy's brow furrowed, confusion battling with fear. "You brought home a savage?" The word cut the air sharp. Sarah's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. James's voice lowered, steady as stone. "She's not what folks in town say. She's a fighter, same as us. And she's here because I said so. That's all that matters." Ethan's eyes shifted back to Sarah, wide and uncertain. He didn't see a mother. He saw a stranger with untamed hair, scars on her arms, and a fire in her stare that scared him as much as it drew him in. That night, the ranch felt different. The house creaked in ways Sarah didn't know yet, and the silence at the dinner table was louder than any gallows crowd. James ate slowly, eyes on his plate. Ethan pushed food around with his fork, glancing at her as if she might sprout claws at any moment. Sarah, unused to such stillness, set down her fork. "You don't want me here," she said flatly, voice low. James didn't look up. "I want my boy to live. He needs someone who won't break." "I figure you're the closest thing to that I've seen," Ethan muttered under his breath. "She's not Ma." The words cut through Sarah sharper than any blade. For a moment she considered snapping back, reminding the boy that she never asked to take anyone's place. But when her eyes met his, something stopped her. Instead, she simply leaned back, arms crossed, letting the firelight flicker against her weary face. Outside, the wind rattled the shutters. Inside, 3 souls sat together but worlds apart. Word traveled fast in Dry Creek. By the next morning, neighbors rode out to the Callahan ranch, curiosity and anger spilling from them like whiskey. Men leaned on their saddles, women whispered behind parasols, all demanding to see if the rumors were true. They didn't knock. They didn't ask. They stood at the fence line, calling James out like he was on trial himself. "Callahan, you've lost your damn mind bringing that woman here. She'll slit your throat in your sleep. Think of the boy, growing up with a heathen for a mother." Sarah stood on the porch, arms folded, eyes cold as she stared them down. She'd faced nooses, bullets, and blades. A few wagging tongues didn't scare her. But James stepped in front of her, his shadow long and unyielding. "She's under my roof now," he said. "And anyone who's got a problem with that, best keep it to themselves. 'Cause my land ain't open for debate." The men muttered, spat and pulled at their reins, but none dared to cross him. Not yet. When they finally rode off, Ethan looked at his father, confusion and fear swirling in his young eyes. "Why do you trust her, Pa?" James knelt, his hand on the boy's shoulder. "Because sometimes the world gives you the wrong kind of woman. The kind who won't kneel, won't beg, won't bend. And in this world, that's the only kind that survives. You want to live, son? Then you'd best learn to trust the fire." Ethan glanced back at Sarah, standing tall on the porch. Her eyes met his, and for the first time, there wasn't just fear between them. There was recognition, 2 souls carrying scars the world would never forgive. That night, as coyotes howled in the distance, Sarah lay awake in the small room James had given her. Freedom was supposed to taste sweet. Instead it was bitter, mixed with suspicion, whispers, and the unshakable sense that the rope she'd escaped was still dangling above her head, waiting for the first mistake. And in the dark, she whispered to herself, a vow no one else could hear. "If they come for me again, they'll find out what savage really means." Her story was not over. It was sharpening. The Callahan ranch became a storm in waiting. Days passed with uneasy calm, but everyone could feel the thunder building. Sarah worked from dawn until dusk, her hands blistered from mending fences, her back sore from hauling water. She moved with the precision of someone who had labored all her life, yet always carried that invisible rope around her neck. The one the town had spared, but never cut free. James watched her in silence. He wasn't a man of many words, but his eyes saw what the neighbors refused to admit. This woman didn't shrink from hard work. She didn't ask for pity. She belonged to the land as much as the dirt and the sky. And yet, belonging was the very thing the town would never grant her. Ethan kept his distance, but not as far as before. At first he watched her with suspicion, convinced she might betray them at any moment. But one morning, when a rattlesnake coiled near the woodpile, Sarah had moved faster than lightning. With one swift strike of the axe, she severed its head before it could lunge at him. She didn't boast, didn't even smile. She just tossed the carcass aside and went back to stacking wood. That was the first time Ethan's eyes softened. Just slightly, but Dry Creek was not softening. By the end of the week, the whispers had hardened into threats. Stray shots fired near the pasture. A calf gone missing. A crude message burned into the barn door. Savages die. James scrubbed the charred wood with a rag, jaw tight. Ethan's small hands trembled as he helped, while Sarah stood in the doorway, her face a mask of fury. "They'll keep pushing," she said coldly. "They want me gone." James glanced at her. "They want you dead." That night the ranch did not sleep. Coyotes howled, the wind rattled the shutters, and in the dark, shadows gathered just beyond the fence line. Men from town, faces hidden under hats, rifles in hand. The attack came sudden. A shot shattered the night, splinters exploding from the porch beam. Horses thundered across the yard, men shouting curses. Ethan screamed as bullets ripped through the barn walls. James grabbed his rifle, firing back from the doorway. "Get down!" he roared, but Sarah didn't get down. She didn't freeze. She moved like the warrior they had accused her of being. With one leap, she was at the side of the house, snatching the shotgun from its rack. She rolled into the dirt, aimed into the shadows, and fired. The blast tore through the night, and a man screamed as he toppled from his saddle. Her hair flew wild, eyes burning with fury. Each movement was sharp, trained, merciless. Ethan watched from behind the table where he crouched, his terror mixing with awe. Don't say it!" James barked, reloading. "Just keep your head down," the fight raged. Bullets cut the night like lightning. Men shouted as they fell. Sarah's bare feet pounded the earth, kicking up dust as she fought side by side with James. For the first time, he saw not just a woman he had saved, but a force he could never have survived without. And then, silence. The attackers scattered into the darkness, dragging their wounded, cursing into the wind. The ranch stood wounded but alive. Sarah lowered the shotgun slowly, chest heaving, hands trembling not from fear, but from rage left unspent. She spat into the dirt, her gaze still locked on the horizon. James stepped forward, his voice low. "They'll be back. Next time, they'll bring more." Sarah wiped blood from her cheek. She hadn't even noticed the cut. "Then let them come. I've lived my whole life hunted. I'm still here." Ethan stepped out from the house, eyes wide, fixed on her. You saved us," he whispered. For the first time, Sarah's mask cracked. Her eyes softened, just for the boy. "No, I saved myself. You just happened to be standing close." But the truth was written in the boy's face. He didn't believe her. Not anymore. He had seen something else. Something even she couldn't deny. The next morning, the town buzzed with news. The savage woman fought off a dozen men. Callahan's ranch turned into a war ground. Blood spilled in the dirt, and she was the one left standing. The preacher fumed in his pulpit. The sheriff rubbed his temples, caught between law and mob. And the people. They whispered with more venom than ever. "She's dangerous. She's the devil's wife. Callahan's cursed for keeping her." But there were other whispers too. Softer. More. "Dangerous. She fought like a soldier. She faced down. Death and didn't flinch. She's stronger than any man in this town." And in the eyes of those who had once spat at her feet, something new flickered, fear. That night, as Sarah sat on the porch sharpening the blade of a hunting knife, Ethan came quietly beside her. He hesitated, then sat down. The boy's voice was small but steady. "Pa said I need a mother. I don't know if you are one, but I want you to stay." Sarah froze, the knife still in her hand. For the first time, the words struck something deep, buried beneath scars and survival. She turned to him slowly, her voice raw, stripped of its armor. "I don't know how to be that boy, but I'll fight for you." "Maybe that's enough," Ethan nodded. And for the first time, Sarah smiled. Not wide, not warm, but real. In the darkness beyond the ranch, unseen eyes watched. The men who had failed were not done. They were sharpening their hate into something bigger. And the preacher's voice was already poisoning the next storm. The rope Sarah had escaped still hung heavy in their minds. And soon, they would come to finish what they had started. The days after the attack turned the Callahan Ranch into a fortress. Boards nailed over shattered windows, bullet holes patched with rough planks. The smell of gunpowder still clung to the dirt like a scar that wouldn't wash away. Sarah patrolled the land at night, knife at her side, shotgun across her lap. James repaired fences with a grim face, his silence heavier than usual. Ethan stayed close to the house, glancing at the horizon as though it might spit out death at any moment. But Dry Creek was not done. In the town's saloon, whiskey spilled as men whispered in tight circles. The preacher's voice carried in every corner, venom turning to fire. "She's not just a savage," he hissed. "She's a curse. First the gallows, then blood on our soil. If we don't stop her, she'll poison our children, burn our homes, and bury us all." His words filled their ears until they believed them. By the time night fell, the plan was set. This wouldn't be another skirmish. This would be an execution, done not with law but with fire and lead. On the ranch, Sarah felt it coming before it came. Some instincts never died. She woke in the dead of night, sweat clinging to her neck, heart hammering. She looked out the window and saw it, torches glowing on the horizon. Dozens of them, moving like a river of hate toward the house. "They're here," she muttered. James was already pulling on his boots, rifle in hand. Ethan, pale and trembling, clutched his small knife as if it could hold back the world. "Stay with your father," Sarah ordered, but James shook his head. "No, tonight we stand together. All of us." The mob thundered onto the property, torches lighting the dark sky. Horses snorted, men shouted, women wailed their curses. And at the front, Bible in hand, eyes glowing with fanatic fire, the preacher raised his voice. "Bring her out, Callahan. We'll give you one chance. Deliver the savage, or we'll burn this place to the ground with you inside it." The crowd roared. Rifles glinted in the firelight. James stepped onto the porch, rifle steady. Sarah stood beside him, shotgun cocked. Ethan, smaller but unshaken, appeared at the doorway with his knife clenched tight. "You want her?" James shouted. "Then you'll have to come through me," the preacher sneered. "Then you'll die with her." The first shot cracked through the night. Then the firestorm began. Bullets whistled, torches flew, glass shattered. Flames licked at the barn. Horses screamed as they tore from their stalls. The ranch was turning to hell. Sarah moved like fury itself. She ducked behind a water trough, blasting the shotgun at the nearest riders. Men toppled from saddles, torches scattering in the dirt. She rolled into the open, knife flashing as another man charged too close. Blood sprayed across the dust as he fell. James fought from the porch, rifle precise, every shot a prayer he didn't believe in. He cut down one, then another, but the mob was endless, pouring in like a flood. Ethan cowered, then found courage he didn't know he had. He grabbed a pistol from his father's belt when James reloaded and fired blindly into the night. The recoil knocked him back, but the bullet found flesh. A rider screamed and dropped his torch. For the first time, the boy felt the fire of survival in his veins. The preacher pushed forward, untouched, his voice rising over the chaos. "See, she spills more blood!
She brings ruin!
End her and save yourselves." His words fed the mob, but Sarah heard nothing but the roar of her own heartbeat. She moved like a storm, every shot, every strike proving the truth they feared. She was not weak. She was not theirs to kill. Then the flames reached the house. The porch crackled, smoke curling upward. Ethan screamed as the fire licked at the doorway. "No!" Sarah roared. She sprinted through the chaos, grabbed a fallen bucket, and hurled water at the flames. Her body shielded the boy as sparks flew around them, and in that moment, the crowd hesitated. They saw not a savage, not a demon, but a woman fighting for a child, fighting with the ferocity of a mother. James saw it too. His voice cut through the smoke and screams. "You see it? She's what you'll never be. She's stronger than all of you. That's why you want her dead." "Because you fear her," the preacher snarled, his voice cracking. "Fear is the truth of God. She is blasphemy made flesh." He raised his pistol, aiming at Sarah's back. The shot rang, But it wasn't his gun that fired. Ethan stood in the doorway, pistol still smoking, his small hands trembling. The preacher staggered, a hole blooming red in his chest. He dropped to his knees, eyes wide in shock, then toppled into the dirt. The mob froze. Their leader was dead. The fire of their rage sputtered without its spark. One by one, men dropped their weapons. Torches hit the ground. Horses turned and fled into the night. Silence fell over the ranch, broken only by the crackle of dying flames. Sarah dropped to her knees, pulling Ethan into her arms. The boy sobbed against her chest, and for the first time, she held him not out of duty, not out of debt, but out of something deeper. Something she had thought burned out long ago. James lowered his rifle, eyes scanning the ruined yard. Bodies in the dirt, smoke in the air, blood soaking into the soil. But his house still stood. His boy still breathed. And beside them, the woman the world had tried to hang was alive. The dawn crept slow and red across the horizon. When it came, the Callahan ranch looked like a battlefield. But in the middle of it, 3 figures stood unbroken. Sarah looked at James, then at Ethan. She had no words for what they had done together, no prayers for the lives they had taken. But for the first time, she didn't feel the rope around her neck. She felt something else, a place, a family. The boy's small hand gripped hers. James gave a single tired nod, and Sarah Cooper, the woman who had been dragged to the gallows as a savage, walked into the new day not as a prisoner, not as an outcast, but as a mother forged in fire. Her story had not ended on the gallows. It had only just begun.